you are trained to be on edge all the time, ready to react every second of every day. When I got out of the military, I had a lot of symptoms that came up and I didn't know what they were. What I know now were anxiety and panic and PTSD. And so I went to my doctor, said, hey, this is what I have going on. And they did what every good doctor does, and they threw me on medications. Basically, I sat down one day and I said, look, you've done a lot of hard in your life. You've accomplished a lot of things. Like, there is absolutely no reason that if you dedicate the required amount of time to this, that you can't overcome this. When you say do hard, I bet 90% of people's thoughts go to exercise, right? Because that probably 90% of people's hard right there. But when you are like you guys, you're in the top, 1% of athletes in the world, almost certainly, that's not your hard anymore. And it was literally like 12 weeks. I was off all medications, never had a panic attack. But saying that's how it started originally, was with the tactical mindset, just all encompassing mindset matters into the podcast. And then I had woke up one day and I was like really slogging through, and I was like, man, like I need to just like write down my goals again and put them on my bathroom mirror, just to like remind myself what I'm doing. And the first line that I wrote was do hard shit. It was just to like remind myself, hey man, get up every day, do the hard shit that matters every single day. And so that's what kind of kicked off, I guess, the Do Hard Shit brand, or whatever we want to call it now. And so I rebranded the podcast as Do Hard Shit. That's where the Instagram page came from. And now we're pushing over into YouTube as well.
Love it, man. So, I think a natural question that I have, and I think Gabe and I were talking about this before, is like, what does it mean to you to do hard shit? Because like, I think people have a general idea of what that means. I think if I say to Gabe, bro, let's go do some hard shit, but hard shit is different for different people. We were actually just talking about this with alcohol and cold plunging. So what does do hard shit mean to you?
Yeah, man, I think you nailed it on the head right there when you said do hard shit means something different to everyone. And that do hard shit is it's gonna depend on where you're at in life. We all go through these seasons of life and where we're at and what we're doing and what our goals are. And so you hit it exactly on the head. What my hard shit is for me may be completely different from you or from what Gabe is, right? Let's see. For instance, I know that in the past you went through a period where your daughter was diagnosed with leukemia, right? Your hard shit in that moment was so different from your hard shit when you were training for the CrossFit Games, right? But yeah, the ethos of do hard shit is whatever is hard for you in that moment, in that day, that's what you need to focus on. You need to get up and do the things that move the needle every single day. And I think there are things that you can do on a more consistent basis that kind of reiterate that in your daily life, whether it's getting up and pushing yourself in the gym, whether it's getting up and doing that cold plunge, no matter what it is, getting up at 4 a.m. and finding the hardest thing of your day and doing it first and nailing it so that you're actually moving that needle forward every day. That's what doing hard shit means to me. And so that may be meditation for one person, and for another person, that may be getting in the gym every day.
Seth, how did we get to a place where this seems like such a revolutionary or like, counter
mind blowing? Yeah.
Because I think that's kind of at the crux of why this is even like a message that needs to be talked about, because people aren't naturally doing hard things, right? Like we've been wrapped in so much convenience. How do you think we got here? And I do feel the pendulum is swinging a little bit. Do you kind of agree, or do you think we need to lean into this stuff a little bit more?
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you. I think that everything being easy in life is more of a modern thing, right? Probably within the past 100 years or so even. And I think every generation of parents wants their kids to have a better and easier life than them. And I think that's where we've gotten to. Everything that we have built, every innovation that we've had over the past 100 years has been to make our lives easier in some way. Every product that's released is made to make your life easier in some way. And now we're to the point where, man, we're like water. We just choose whatever is, the path of least resistance in everything that we do. Whether it's, it used to be that I had to actually drive to, Chipotle to get my big fat burrito. And now I can actually just hit a button on my phone and it's dropped in front of my door. Eventually someone's just going to come and put it in my mouth and move my jaw for me and chew it up for me or something. I don't know. But it's like, it's gotten so simple, so easy. And everyone now, it's like, I see it in medicine even, because now I'm an ER physician, and it's just like everyone wants the easy thing. Everyone knows the solution to diabetes and heart disease. Everybody's aware. Information's so readily available. We know what it takes to get rid of these man-made diseases. But instead of me spending 12 weeks to, get my mind and my body where they need to be, I would rather just go to my doctor and have them give me a pill, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. Right? That's where we're at. And that's exactly what you're speaking to, Gabe. It's become to where it's revolutionary, and to push back and say, hey, like actually choose to do the hard shit. But I do think that we have a lot more people coming around, both inside and outside the medical community, who realize this now and are starting to push forward in this arena. I think CrossFit was even I think it was a great thing. And like, whether it went off the rails or whatever you want to call it, like I started CrossFit, I guess, back before CrossFit was cool. Maybe in like the 2006 timeframe, when it was still like early military special forces type stuff. And I think that really was a great move, because it drew so many people into like doing the hard shit again, like forming a community and like doing the things that were really tough. Right. And so I do think that we are taking a step in the right direction. I think more people are becoming aware of it. More people are cold plunging. More people are getting into saunas. More people are pushing themselves. So yeah, I think we're stepping in the right direction. But yeah, we definitely need to lean into this shit a little harder.
Seth, you said you got into CrossFit early 2006. Was that when you were in the Navy, or how did you find it? Where were you out of?
Yeah, so I went into the Navy in 2004. And then it was probably around 2005 that I actually got into CrossFit. I was based out of Little Creek, Virginia, the amphib base out there. And I was actually prepping for my special operations selection course. And so that's when I learned about CrossFit. We were doing that, getting the shit kicked out of us all day. And then that was part of our training before we went down to our selection course in Florida.
Got it. And so I just think you have a really interesting background. When when we got connected, I love the fact that you obviously have this military background and you had those experiences of doing hard shit, going through selection. I want to talk about commitment there, but now being an ER doctor, I just find that to be super fascinating. And I guess a question I'd have is like, when it comes to doing hard shit and being exposed as a medical professional in the ER, you are exposed to so many really difficult moments. How do you segment the difficult moments in the ER with then like compartmentalizing that and not taking that back with your family? Because how many children do you have?
4.
How do you do that? Because
creating like a basketball team here.
Yeah, because Gabe and I talk about this sometimes, and our perspective is, significantly different than yours, where him and we could be recording podcasts, doing newsletters, doing work, doing content creation, whatever it is, right? And maybe, we could be riffing on something and getting like a frustrated mood or whatever, and then bring that back in the house, right? You could be at work and literally, bro, you could see gunshot wound to knife victim to this, to that. And then you have to go home to your family. How do you do that? How do you compartmentalize your work and your family?
Oh man, that's such a great question. So I think part of what allows me to do that is probably comes from my history, comes from before I was an ER doctor. Going through special forces, going through a couple deployments to Iraq, I think that first is where I learned how to separate work from play. I think that it goes back that far. Subsequent to that, I was a special agent with the State Department, and that was even more of that as well. Now as an ER doctor, I think even still, I'm very, very intentional about it. And I think you have to be intentional about it. So before I go into work every day, I usually will sit there and do breathing exercises in my car for 1 or 2 minutes. And that is really just to like reset my fight or flight response before I move into those situations, which I know are going to enact those. And before I come home, I will literally pull up in my driveway and I will sit in my driveway for 5 or 10 minutes, just breathing and processing everything. And that way, when I step out of my truck and walk into my house, I am completely reset into like dad mode and husband mode. And I'm like very intentional. I don't talk about work at home. I don't bring work home with me. Like a lot of the docs I work with, they'll do their notes at home like the next day. And I absolutely refuse to do it. I will not do it because it is my way of separating the two traumas in life, right? I leave all the trauma at work and I come home to my family so that they see the best of me intentionally. And so I think the act of being intentional about it is what allows you to do it successfully.
Has that been a muscle you've had to flex a little bit, or have you always been able to have that approach? Because I would, all that sounds really well and good, but I'd imagine that for the average person, these things are really tough to do, man. I mean, I know that it's easy, even if you're outside, and going to wait in the car for a little bit, how easy it is nowadays to, pull up your phone and scroll instead of being intentional about what you're actually doing to switch mindset versus just wasting time. So are these things you've kind of developed over time, or, you kind of had those tools, like you said, again, from your background before being an ER doc?
Yeah, no, I think it develops over time. I also think that nobody has everything figured out, right? We're all learning. Even the guys at the top, right? All the gurus out there, they're still figuring this shit out, just like we are. Maybe they're a little further along in their course, but yeah, this shit took a long time to figure out throughout my military career, my State Department career, and now it's like you catch yourself every once in a while coming into the house, you're pissed off about work, you're still thinking about that kid that died, you're still thinking about whatever it is, right? And you constantly have to remind yourself, don't do this next time. Or maybe you don't, you come in and you're still upset about something. And then I have to go into the room or go lock myself in the bathroom, right, for a little while to like breathe through it and reset myself. So I don't think it's that I'm perfect. I don't think that I've reached a point where I can say like I'm the guru of this. It's literally just a daily battle, one day at a time, choosing every day to try to do the best you can in that moment.
I want to kind of go back to something you said about the State Department, then into the Navy, then as an ER doc. Why that journey? Like, what took you from the State Department to then feeling passionate about getting to the Navy, and then why become an ER doc? Like, because dude, on the surface, your State Department job sounds pretty incredible. What you did in the Navy with Special Forces, awesome. And then you go become an ER doc, and now you're becoming a content creator. I'm like, really? Like, what's the why behind this thread?
Yeah, man. So I definitely, if you would take me back, 20 years, I would never have guessed where I would be now, right? I definitely wouldn't have 4 kids if you would have asked me 20 years ago. But wow. So summing up the story. So I believe you're from California as well, Jason, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Are you from California as well, Gabe?
No, originally New York. Spent some time in California, ended up in Texas.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I grew up outside the Bakersfield area.
Yeah,
I think you're familiar with that area, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up out in the sticks out there on a small farm, and I had a pretty good childhood. I don't have complaints, right? My parents divorced when I was young, but whatever. My parents were great. I had a great life. What happened was I went to Sonoma State University right after high school. And I did the typical freshman, drink my ass off, sleep too much, didn't go to class type thing. Well, it just so happened that my roommate, he was doing the same thing, but his dad was a Navy SEAL captain. And I bumped into him one day and we started chatting. And I thought, man, I'm not doing much. Like, that sounds pretty awesome. I'm going to do that with the rest of my life. And, I think back now, and it's funny because I think the naivety that we have when we're young is actually what allowed me to accomplish so much in life so early. And so I left school after a semester, went and, did a couple push-ups, a couple sit-ups, and said, all right, I'm ready. I'm ready to be a Navy SEAL, having absolutely no idea what the hell I was getting myself into. And so I went to sign up for the military in what's called MEPS, where you spend like a day in processing or whatever. And I was so excited. I got to the end of the day and they said, yeah, you can't be a Navy SEAL. And I was like, oh, well, that sucks. Is there anything that's like just like being a Navy SEAL? And they're like, yeah, Navy EOD. And I was like, I'll take it. Had absolutely no idea what I signed up for. And so I got home and I read the pamphlet. And I don't know if you know what Navy EOD is. If you've seen that movie, The Hurt Locker, that's kind of, So The Hurt Locker is Army EOD. They're not a special operations group. Navy is, and we can get into why that is and whatever. But so that's what I found out I was doing. And I still remember my dad. It was really funny because he said, I think you can do this physically, but yeah, you've never been very good academically, so I'm not sure you're going to make it. And that was like a real kick in the nuts, right? Coming from your pop saying that. But anyways, went into the military in 2004. Graduated selection in end of 2006.
Seth,
Did a couple.
not to cut you, just to cut you off for just a quick second. Why did they say you weren't eligible to get into the teams?
Oh yeah, sorry. At that time, there was a vision cutoff, and I wore contacts at that time, and I missed it by it was like 10 points or something. It was like so close. And so that it was super frustrating. And what happened was when I was actually in boot camp, they were coming around trying to recruit guys to go into the SEALs, and they had actually changed the vision requirements between those two dates. And I actually qualified at that point, but I was already signed up for EOD at that point. And I'm actually really glad I ended up doing what I did, but that was the backstory behind that. Sorry that I skipped over that, but did a couple tours to Iraq. On my first tour to Iraq, one of my best buddies that I deployed with, he had always wanted to be a doctor, and we were trained in battlefield medicine and all that stuff. And so when I was there, came across a lot of traumas, a lot of, things like that. And seeing that, it really kind of struck a chord in me. And I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Like, this is pretty neat. I had no idea, never thought I would be a doctor, didn't grow up around anyone in medicine, nothing like that. But the guy that I was there with, he was watching Scrubs in his downtime. So we would run missions at night, and then he was watching Scrubs during the day, which I still think is like the most realistic medical show if you're ever going to watch one. The humor in it's like dead on. But I watched some of those with him. That's how it all happens. We watch one too many shows and we get interested in something, and then before you know it, we're doing it. But so did that. And I said, when I got back from Iraq, my first tour, I went and became an EMT, was my team's medic for my second tour. Worked a lot more with some of the special forces medics, things like that. And so when I got back, my original plan was to get out and go to medical school. I still had a couple years of undergraduate to complete. And so I went to San Diego and finished my undergrad. And when I was there, my little bit of ADHD kicked in. And I had worked with a couple of the 3-letter agencies in Iraq, and I thought it was pretty cool. And so I said, I'm just going to toss out a couple resumes and see if anything sticks. So I shot out some resumes to some different guys that I knew, some different 3-letter agencies. And the first one that reached back to me was the State Department. And I went and interviewed there. It's always like in some motel room, some random motel room.
Is that really so when I think about when you're talking about State Department, CIA, et cetera, you think about Jason Bourne, and I've had some exposure to some people that worked for the department, different departments and 3-letter agencies. But so you went to so when your interview, you don't go this building that's it's like a bakery, but in the back, it's like a brick wall,
like some speakeasy.
Or a building with no logos on it, right? It's just a gray building in the middle of nowhere. But wait, you met at a motel for your interview?
Yeah. So actually, both for State Department and some of the other agencies, it's always it seems to always be done in a hotel somewhere, like some random hotel, it could be the Marriott or whatever. And what they do is they just rent a whole bunch of rooms on a floor, and you go through a series of interviews. Usually, the way it works is you'll take a written exam first, and then a personality test and all this stuff online. And then if you pass that, they invite you to an interview, and the interviews are always in some random hotel room. And there's a whole bunch of different interviews set up in different rooms, and it may be one-on-one, it may be one on, 2 or 3. And they're always have an objective in that room. So sometimes it may be, you just one-on-one. And if you pass that stage, then you go into another room, and it's a guy who's sitting there throwing scenarios at you. And he may say, okay, you are this position in this country, and this police officer comes up to you and he's harassing you because he thinks you're a spy, or whatever it is, whatever position you're interviewing for. And you have to instantly go into character and act out what you would do in that situation, or you have to walk them through what you would do in those situations. So it's actually really cool. It's really nerve-wracking. But yeah, that's the way they usually all work out in some nondescript hotel room. Yeah.
This is out of a movie. I'm imagining Morgan Freeman's definitely one of the guys interviewing you for one of those movies,
Yeah, that was something.
I feel he always plays the head guy in something.
Yeah.
That's what a ride. What a ride.
Yeah,
and now from there, ER doc, correct?
Well, yeah. So so I went to I interviewed with the State Department. I think I found out there was about 15,000 interviewees for about 100 positions. Is the way that it broke down. And so I landed one of those positions.
Wow.
I had later on during the course while I was waiting for that to start, because it's a long process. It takes about 18 months from when you interview to like when you actually class up. And so I had actually a couple other offers from some other agencies during that time. I decided to go with the State Department. I liked their mission set. I liked their overseas mission set and whatever. There's a lot of avenues you can run down with that. But I went to the State Department, went through a lot of different training for that. That took about a year and a half worth of training.
What is that training? So you, at this point, you had done some special operations for the Navy. You'd had some deployment. So I imagine you had, tactics. You had all these different things. Completely different, I imagine, for the State Department. Is that correct? So like the military focus versus, kind of the State Department focus. How is that training different? I don't know. You could talk about whatever you could talk about. I'm just curious from a training perspective, how does that change?
Yeah. It was, there were some similarities and there were some vast differences. The military I trained mostly for what we know for going to war. So my training in the military was as EOD is explosive ordnance disposal. It's disarming bombs, right? And so for Navy, that's a special operations branch. So we go further into training into chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. We train in like high altitude jumps. We train in tactics. We train in all kinds of stuff. That is why we attach to special forces units and SEAL units and things like that. And so that's the way that the Navy's a little bit different than the rest. And we also do a lot of underwater explosive things. And so a lot of my initial training was heavily geared towards those type of things. Now, when you go into some of your specialized teams that I did, you go into a lot of things like how to break into houses, how to defeat alarm systems, how to, those type of things, how to steal cars, whatever it is like that your mission set needs to entail. And so the things that were similar were that we did a lot of defensive driving training in the military. We did a lot of shooting, things like that. And those crossed over into the State Department as well. But where the State Department differed was we did a lot of things with diplomacy, right? How do you interact with ambassadors from other countries? How do you interact with other, how do you go into a country and set up an entire security team and security plan for the Secretary of State's visit that's coming in, right? That's a completely different mission set than walking into a country with your M4 and your A1 tank behind you. Like it's very different. And so that mission set taught me a lot more about how to interact with people, about how to give presentations, about how to do leadership and management because I would go into embassies and we would be responsible for running 85 different security programs, right? You see like an embassy and you see the Marines standing around it, right? Guarding it. That's one security program of like 85 programs that we would run out of an embassy. So you have to be like very high level, very leadership oriented, very diplomatic in that situation. So the training was very different.
Man, that's fascinating. Just taking a quick step back before you kind of continue on the journey. One thing that your story makes me think about a lot, because you mentioned your dad saying, never been good academically. You mentioned your first semester in college just being, the typical like missing class and all that stuff. I feel like that is a very average, or there's a lot of men that go through that journey, right? Like me and Jason have talked about on the podcast before, the fact that also just our education system just as a whole isn't ideally geared towards young men. And a lot of young men struggle in school. They're not getting to college as much. So I can see a lot of people kind of getting to that point. What do you think helped you not go in the other direction and actually turn that into what has been, it sounds like an awesome career with a lot of awesome life experience and has kind of gotten you to the point you're at now? What is the difference there? And what maybe is some advice out there? And maybe not some advice even to like the young person, but I know, I'm raising a son, Jason's raising a son. I'm sure that your 4 kids, you have sons. Like what's kind of the advice there for us as dads to help, guide young men in that direction?
Gabe, I'm so glad you ended your question that way. That like led it perfectly into what I was going to say anyways. And I would say it was my dad. It was my childhood that allowed me to succeed. I'd love to say it was like something, some cool magical tip that I discovered along the way. But honestly, it was the way I was raised. Like growing up on a farm, growing up in the sticks, my dad, having me dig ditches and holes in the ground and hoeing weeds all summer and making me do the hard shit when I was a child taught me the discipline necessary to choose to do those things as an adult. I have to give complete credit to my parents in that regard. That was not something that I chose. I mean, I have siblings who are also very successful in life because of the way that my parents raised us. So being a dad, being a present father, being a father who doesn't coddle your child 24/7, not being a helicopter parent, forcing your children to do the hard things while they're young, it's absolutely essential, especially in this world that allows you to have such an easy life if that's what you choose. But we have to be intentional about it as fathers.
And Seth, maybe to dive in a little deeper than that, or to that, when you say about being intentional and you grew up in Bakersfield and on this farm, how do you do that now for your children? Gabe and I, we talk about this a lot because our job as dads is to protect, right? Like it's really important. But I also think adversity teaches grit, teaches all the things we're talking about, doing hard shit, right? So what are you doing to kind of thread that line of like, exposing them, but not so much that they're failing, getting hurt, whatever. Like, where is that? What are you doing in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly don't even feel like I'm an expert at this. I feel like you guys are probably...
I don't know if anybody is. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I feel like I'm discovering it just as you guys are. I mean, my kids range in age from 1 all the way up to 14. And so I guess I've been trying and practicing at this for 14 years, but I can guarantee you guys have the same thoughts and go through the same experiences that I do on a daily basis. And you're constantly trying to weigh like, do I pick up my kid when they fall, or do I let, make them stand up themselves and brush it off? Right. There's the constant pull, the struggle that we deal with as parents. And, I'd love to say like, my kids get up at 5 a.m. and jump straight into the cold plunge and then into the sauna and then they're kettlebelling for the next hour, but it's not true. And I mean,
right.
We do our best, man. We do our best. And I think it's just a constant decision you really have to, again, you have to be intentional about it every time, right? Every time that your child is struggling, are you picking them up, or are you saying, hey, hop up, you're okay, right? When your kid falls off their bike, are you running and instantly, pulling them off the ground and brushing them off? Or are you saying, hey, get up, let's go, right? It's the small things that they get put in their minds. Like nobody's coming to save you every time you fall. Nobody's coming to comfort you every time that you're scared, right? You have to do the hard shit. Telling your 4-year-old, you need to go into the dark, find the light and turn it on yourself. I'm not going to get up and go do it for you, right? It's a million small decisions, not one big decision. It's not one thing that I think any of us can tell, someone else, do this and it will solve all of your problems. Your children will grow up tough. It's just like the rest of life. It's a million small cuts that make, that cut the tree down.
Man, and it is so hard. I'll share a quick story that I think I've shared on the podcast before, but we have this podcast, we talk about it all the time. I would say that I am intentional about, being that dad that isn't, like being too soft and whatever. And I remember when we took Shay, our son, to gymnastics, and it was like the second day, and he didn't want to get into this ball. I'll never forget this. He didn't want to like jump into this little ball pit. And I was like, yeah, you can stay with me. And this mom just turns around, looks at me, and without batting an eye, she just goes, "She's got to throw him in." And I was like, she's so right. And it was such a funny moment because we put out this message constantly, but to your point, it goes to the fact that like, I know what the right thing to do is, but in the moment, it is just so hard. Like he doesn't want to go in, but like we're at gymnastics, like he should go in. He should be a little uncomfortable. And for the mom to turn around and literally just tell me, it's like, dude, you just got to throw him in. And like, sure enough, threw him in. Everything was all right. But it's just, I'll never forget that because it was such a telling example of like, you can talk the talk as much as you want, but when the rubber meets the road, like it is so hard, hard.
It's so hard with your own children. 100%, man. I run into this all the time as a physician, right? when I treat other people's kids, it's
Oh,
easy. When I treat my own kids, it is hard, man. It is hard to stay objective. Like when my wife says, "Hey, so one of our children fell, or they have this cough," it spikes that flood of adrenaline. Like you said, Jason, like we are protectors. That is what we're designed to do. And so when we are treating our own children, when we're thinking about how to raise our children perfectly, we are not thinking straight. We're not. And so it's like, it's almost helpful to ask someone else, "Hey, am I doing this right? Like, what do you think about this? What would you do in this situation?" But that's what I have to do when it's my own children who are sick. I often will have to ask a colleague, "Hey, am I
yeah. What would you
going
do?
overboard here?" Like,
That's a really good example, right? Like, because I don't know. For example, you have a kid that's sick, and I don't know. Should I give him a Z pack or whatever? I don't whatever name the
right,
thing.
right,
But
right.
getting a third party, because you become emotional about it, right? Oh shit, my kid's sick. I want to do this. Wow, yeah, that's a whole different lens because you're so educated that you want to try and like do all this, but maybe it's too much or maybe it's too little, and you become biased. I think one of the things that we're doing at our house, I think, has been helpful, and I'm curious how you do this with the cold plunge and other stuff. This morning, I'm in the garage really early with a group of guys, and we were just talking about raising kids. And one of my buddies who's there, his kids are like monsters. I mean, they are so athletic and just gritty and just like, dude, they're just those kids, right? And I'm like, bro, you're killing it. And one of the things that him and I were talking about is just how our kids grew up in a way where they watch us just do hard shit. It's just like, it's just built into the system. Like my kids know they're going to see mom, they're going to see me. We're going to be doing hard shit on a regular basis. It's not uncommon. So I'm curious, are you and your wife or are you guys doing things? I mean, obviously, are you encouraging the cold plunge? Are you just doing it in front of them? Are you talking about it? How does that relate?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, like you said, it's integrating it into their daily life, right? Like we said earlier, it's 1,000 small cuts, right?
Thousands.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say both of my daughters have a "Do Hard Shit" poster hanging on their walls.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a good dad or a bad dad. I'm not really sure. I haven't decided yet, but
I like it.
I don't know. Is shit still a curse word these days? I don't know, man.
That's kind of like a neutral. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we'll go with it. But, one daughter, actually both daughters have cold plunge with me quite a bit, one more than the other. The other is kind of like I was when I was a kid, just really doesn't take well to the cold water. I can't get my son in it yet. I've tried. I get him up to about his thighs, and then he starts freaking out. He's my 4-year-old. But we try, man. And then my other one's 1, so I don't know. I guess her daily life is hard shit for her. But
So do you have three? Do you have three girls and one boy?
Yeah, exactly. Two older daughters, and then a boy who's 4, and then a 1-year-old daughter. Yeah.
Awesome.
With your daughters, Gabe and I, we've been on kind of like this kick. We had a guy, Tony Blauer. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, but I just want to ask you about this. We had this guy, Tony Blauer, on the show, and he's all about kind of fear management. He's about understanding. And I think that over time, we've discussed, like, I'm currently reading this book about knowing fear and how women in particular, they just have a different set of concerns than we do. Like, I don't ever have to worry about someone like following me in a grocery store. I was talking to my wife about this last night. Like, I've never had to concern myself of someone following me, a guy in a supermarket, and then following me in a car. And like, I was talking to my wife, she's like, yeah, I've had it happen where I've had to drive around drive around our neighborhood multiple times before going home because I got nervous about a car that came out at the same time that I did from a parking lot. I just don't even think like that. So I'm curious with your daughters that are older, because I have a 13-year-old daughter. What are you doing in terms of like developing their self-awareness to be kind of like in touch and in tune with their surroundings instead of being just on their phones or things like that? What type of lessons are you trying to impart with them in that category?
God, that's so good. That's so good. I think that book, I don't know if it's the same book. Is it called Fear or something like that?
Yeah.
The Gift of Fear?
The Gift of Fear.
I had that book recommended to me some years ago. I think I read the initial part of it. It's really an excellent book. It really is. Kind of brings some things to light, more about like how you need to trust your instincts when you feel something. Yeah,
exactly.
It's so good. So good. Yeah. And yes, I would say that is what I do try to impart on my daughters, especially in the past few years as they've kind of hit that age where it's become more important and they're out more with their friends. They're out more on their own, things like that. But, you know, I still helicopter a little bit as far as like their phones are tracked all the time. and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. But yeah, I
Not
do
for
think
me either.
yeah, I don't think so, man. But yeah, that book and the concepts that it brings up and being able to just like trust those instincts, and I learned them, I guess. We all learned them growing up, but those were trained into me. Millions of dollars worth of training were dumped into me for those exact scenarios, whether it was in war or with the State Department. That was what we did, and we watched hands, we watched body motion, we watched actions. What are people looking at? What are they holding in their hands? How are they moving? Are people moving in groups? Are people moving against groups? Like, is this door open? Is that door open? Sit this way. Don't sit this way, right? And it's trained into like your daily life. And I think I exemplify that to them every day. But like, I probably actually, you just bringing it up, I probably do need to be more intentional now that they're hitting that age about teaching them these things. So now I think you bringing it up is actually going to make it more a part of my life than it already is.
Yeah, it's definitely an advantage, right? To having that training, that formal training.
Mm-hmm.
I think that everyone can just be a little bit more self-aware, but like anything, there's levels to this. One quick thing that I remembered as you were saying that, because you've had that training, I don't know if you guys have seen this clip of Chris Williamson, who has a podcast, had Jocko on his podcast. And he talks about how one of the cameras was focused on Jocko's face the entire interview as just kind of like a cut that they would then bring into the video. And the videographer noticed something crazy, that whenever Chris Williamson was leaning back in his chair, Jocko was just talking and looking right at him. But whenever he leaned in to Jocko a little bit and his hands were over the table, just every couple sentences, Jocko's eyes would go to his hands, and just he was constantly scanning. And some of this stuff is just like built in to people that have had that training. Like, it's a level of situational awareness that, like, Jay, me and you probably can't even understand, right? But it's built in. It's just like what they do, watching hands, watching stuff like that. It reminded me that, and it's like anything, there's levels to this stuff, right?
Yeah, without a doubt, man.
I wanted to. That's fun. That's awesome. I'd never heard that before. Was
I'll
that
send
reason?
you the clip, and it's crazy because you can see it in the video, and Jocko's literally just talking, but like every couple sentences, you can just see like his eyes go down, looks at Chris's hands, and then he goes back to talking.
We should ask Jocko and be like, bro, were you did this just like line up, or were you actually like, making sure you didn't, pull out a knife or something?
I would assume it's not even intentional. I would assume it's just like me and you breathe, and Jocko watches hands.
I actually met my current wife when I was working in Tunisia. So she's Tunisian, which is a small country in North Africa, if you're not familiar. But I was actually there helping out with some embassy security during that time. And so after we met, every time we would go out, we'd go coffee or whatever. She remarked on that years later after we were married about those times when she would watch me, and it was like head on a swivel all the time. Every person that walked by, I'm watching hands, and I had no idea. I didn't even realize it was something I was doing. Everybody who brought coffee, I'm watching. What are they doing in the kitchen? Where's the exit door? I sat in rooms certain ways, and these were things I didn't even realize that I was doing. And she mentioned them years later, like, yeah, that's how you are. That's what you do. Everywhere we go, you're constantly watching people.
Seth, do you think that that's something that you have had to tone down now? Do you think that it's something you could even tone down if you needed to? Is there like a baseline level of stress that you feel is like a little elevated because that stuff is all drilled into you? I'm curious.
Yeah, it was too much. It was too much. It was necessary during those careers, but it is too much for daily life, man. And so we haven't got into any of that, but like, the experiences from the military, from the State Department, caused a lot of mental health issues. And part of it is that is trained into you every single day, right? You are trained to be on edge all the time, ready to react every second of every day. And you can't live your life like that. It's too much. You're walking on a knife's edge all the time. And that level of adrenaline that you're pumping into yourself all the time causes this high level of cortisol to develop in you, which is just absolutely wreaks havoc on your body. Whether it's training for high rocks. Is that what you guys did recently?
Yeah, recently. Yeah.
High rocks. Right. You can train for that, for so many months, but eventually, if you keep training and training and training and training and training, you're going to overtrain, and your body's going to start shutting down. right? We all know that that's how overtraining works. And it's the same way when it comes to any type of mental training. If you are living on this knife's edge where you're constantly watching over your shoulder, you're constantly watching hands all the time, it brings this level of cortisol and stress so high that that's where you start to develop these mental health issues with anxiety and depression and PTSD and things like that. And so for me, those cracks started to develop after I got out of the military, before I went in the State Department. And it took me years and years and years to figure out what it was. And so later on, I had to become very intentional about breaking down those barriers and actually kind of regressing in that training, I guess, those things that were trained into me, and realize I'm not in war anymore. I'm not, protecting someone anymore. You are your family to some degree, but like, I'm not protecting a high level individual who's under constant threat. I don't have to see every person's hands. I don't have to watch every door. I don't have, always sit with my back to, the door, my face to the door, which I probably still do. But, you know what I mean? Like, you have to break those things down. Eventually you have to take a break.
Well, let me ask you this, and because I'm curious myself. We have this theory of like bulkhead ready on this podcast, where basically you try and sit close to the front of the plane. So you try and put yourself in a position where someone wanted to rush the cockpit, like you're there to make a change, right? And obviously sitting in restaurants and stuff, I am more aware, especially if I'm concealed carrying. Like, I'm trying to be really, really aware of my surroundings and depending on where I'm at, obviously. My question for you is, it sounds like, your training put you in a state of like this constant fight or flight, which wasn't sustainable, and it created some mental health issues. I totally could see that based on your training. But then where do you back off to, and what type of practical advice do you have for a listener who's a dad with a couple of kids and you're at a restaurant? What's some like practical things you could do without like taking it over the top, where, to your point, you just become paranoid all the time, and that's also not healthy?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you have to realize that life is very situational dependent. Okay. First, are you by yourself, or are you with your family? Are you with your wife? Are you with your kids? Like, what's the situation first? And then realizing, where are you? Right. That's number two. Are you in a location that's, an upper class neighborhood and you're having coffee, or are you in, a gentrifying neighborhood that could go either way, right? Those are all questions that you have to develop and that you have to pay attention to. Are you concealed carry? Are you not concealed carry? What kind of access do you have? So I would say I'm always considering those. I think you probably do so as well, whether it's intentional or not. You're always assessing your surroundings, but becoming more intentional about, where am I going? Who am I with? What am I doing? What is my access to some type of defensive mechanism, whether it's a weapon, a weapon on your hip or something in the room. And then based upon those scenarios and those answers, you can kind of formulate how aware you need to be of what's going on around you. Because we'll say the reality and the majority of people out there, when you go to your morning brunch with your family, you probably don't need to know what's in every single person's hand in the entire room. But you probably do need to know where the door is and maybe where a back door is, right? I do want to sit with my, back to the wall and being able to see what's coming at me. That's about the level that I would need to be at. Do I need to have a pistol on me all the time? Probably not, because there's a lot of other things in a room that can be turned into weapons very quickly. But in a higher risk situation, or a scenario that raises the threat level a little bit, yeah, you need to have your weapon on you. You do. And you need to sit with your back to the wall, and you need to be aware of your kids and you need to have them in a situation to where they can be pushed to the side and you can address a threat if it comes in. Right. So it's all about, and this was the same way in the State Department when we were building security plans. It depends on this. Every situation is different, and just getting good at being aware of your surroundings and realizing what resources you have available and who is there that you need to protect. You can build out your security plan from there every time.
Dude, I love this conversation. I'm having so much fun on this show right now, dude. I just want to say thank you. because
Yeah, man.
I love these conversations. It gets me my fucking wheels turning. I'm like, dude, this is great. Anyways, Gabe, you were going to say something.
Jason's
It's so
over here
funny,
putting up
man. Like
arrows in his head.
each of us in our lives have like these set of experiences that we don't even think about being like extraordinary or anything different, right? So I think like these things that I know, like everybody has these experiences. Everyone knows all of this stuff, but I guess not everyone does, right? And it's the same
And
thing.
it's the way you break it down. It's the way you articulate it, right? The way you summarize it is very much so like, okay, this guy's obviously been educated to understanding threat levels, to understanding protection. Okay, he's breaking it down by this. Okay,
Yeah.
how can I translate that in my life? Like this last 3 minutes has been super valuable the way you broke that down. So thank you.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course.
It's very actionable. And then what I was going to say is, because I mean, this is something that I've had to be more aware of, and maybe this is just, more of a millennial thing, but even the things that like you shouldn't be doing, like staring at your phone at certain times, like what distractions are there too, is like even a step before some of those things, right? Like I think that those things are all great, but I know that we're walking around very distracted all the time. We're driving around distracted all the time. And I think that that's something that also needs to be talked about and addressed. But the way you broke it down, I think that that's what makes it super beneficial, is just how like very clear and digestible that stuff is. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. And I think you're dead on when you said that. Like, what a distracted world we live in, right? Everything, everyone, everywhere is pandering for your attention 24/7. We live in a more distracted world than we ever have, which, that's a whole topic unto its own. But yeah, you absolutely hit it on the head, man.
Man, I recently spent a week traveling in California. I forgot my watch charger. So I had to put it on like energy save mode, which paused me getting my phone notifications on my watch. And that was eye-opening from a perspective of just how distracting it is to not even get the notification. Like I feel it in my pocket, but like, reading it on my watch every time, when like, it's never something that needs to be like addressed at that moment. It's just you constantly, with more technology, have more access and more access. Now I see, ads for these new glasses and stuff, right? Where now you're going to be able to get notifications and stuff like pushed into your line of sight, in real time. And it's just, you start thinking about where these things are going. And I think we're going to be more and more distracted if we're not seeing that those things are coming and seeing the potential pitfalls of plugging more and more into this digital world.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, and I agree with you, Gabe. That's why I don't have an iWatch, Apple Watch. I can't do it. And people would say, "Oh, you can still wear it and not have the notifications." Like, well, yeah, but I just don't want to wear it at all. Like
that's what I did now. That's what I literally
turned off the notification.
Yeah, I just don't have that. I was like, A, now I don't have to charge it as often, and B, like, did I really need that? Do I really need to know? So.
Yeah, I ended up turning off my notifications as well. I mean, it was like so disruptive when I'm at work trying to talk to patients, and my wrist is constantly buzzing every 5 seconds. It's like you can't focus on what's going on.
Seth, I want to ask your opinion about commitment. There was something I saw online that you talked about. A lot of people, they'll get to a hard situation and their commitment will be tested. Take special operations, right? And we've talked to different gentlemen who have gone through SEAL training, and the difference between the people who make it through BUDS and not is this deep level of commitment. And they can't get that commitment when things are hard. They have to align with that way before things are hard. And the translation I have for us is in business, right? We make commitments for train hard. We make commitments for our businesses, and things are going to get hard. It's naturally going to happen. But I wanted to just ask about your mindset on you like full commitment and how you've gone through different stages of your life. You've been tested in different ways, whether that's State Department, military. You've obviously gone through a variety of selection processes. How do you align your commitment with like a strong, deep why and ethos to allow you to be successful at whatever you're trying to get through in that next phase?
Yeah, that last part you said is absolutely perfect, man. It's about your why. It's about your why. It always comes back to your why, right? And as you said, you've spoken with other guys in this field, and the ones who make it and the ones who don't. What's the difference? Well, we know it's not physical, right? For 99% of them, it's not physical. I've seen some of the most like impressive athletes in my life who have failed within days of starting selection, because that's not what selection's about. Yeah, it's a kick in the ass like physically, but both of you could easily make it through selection physically, Absolutely. It comes down to the mindset, right? And when we break that down a little bit further, it's I sit there and I was actually contemplating this morning. What is it that like allowed me to keep going when I thought about quitting? Because anyone who tells you they never thought about quitting going through selection is a fucking liar. Like it absolutely like crosses everyone's mind at some point, right? When you're doing CrossFit or high rocks or whatever you're doing, like there are points that are so hard that you're like, I don't know if I can keep going. Like this hurts. Like this hurts bad. Anyone who's ever done anything really, really hard has contemplated quitting at some point. Right now, how deep you go into that quitting or that thought process is different, but there has to be a why. There has to be something, some reason that keeps you going through those situations. And I was thinking about like, what was mine? What was my reason? And I don't think it was anything revolutionary. It was I could never face like going home and telling people that I quit. I could never go home and face people telling like my dad that I quit. I think every boy has like this drive to impress their dad, to make them proud of them in some way. It was a big thing for me. And so that's what it was for me going through selection. And I think it changed later in life, but going through special ops selection, that's what it was for me. I didn't want to go home a quitter. I didn't want to be known as a quitter. Okay. And so like, what do we have to do to prepare ourselves to get to the point where we just don't quit? And this is where I think that the idea of eustress or intentional hardship comes into it, right? And it's become, as we talked about, Gabe, it's become more prevalent in the past couple of years, is intentional hardship. Why do we get into a cold plunge, right? What is the reason that we sit in a sauna for 30 or 40 minutes? What is the reason? Why do you push yourself to become a CrossFit Games winner, right? These things are intentional stressors that we put on our body. And the more you intentionally stress your body, the more you can control your body when it's unintentionally stressed, right? It's why special ops train so hard in preparation to go to war. Right? It's why we constantly forced ourselves into hard situations. We chose to do the hard thing over and over and over again. That way, when the hard shit hits that is unplanned, it's natural. You've been doing it every single day of your life. You've been choosing the hard things over and over. So when that stressor comes, it's natural to choose to keep going. It's natural to push through it. So I think there's two parts of your answering your question. And one is having your why. What is your why? Even in business, what is your why? Why are you getting up every single morning to do what you're doing? What it is, I don't know what it is for you and your business, whether it's to help men become better. Is it to help fathers become better dads, to help them become better protectors, whatever it is, right? So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is, are you intentionally stressing yourself in a safe environment where you're intentionally doing it so that you can handle the stressors that come unintentionally towards you and that you know how to already overcome those challenges? So that's the way I think about it.
Perfect. That was exactly what I wanted to hear.
Seth, how did you get started with the cold plunge specifically? Was that something that you actually, because I know that getting into cold water is obviously was a part of your training. Was that okay? So that was the catalyst.
I hate it too, man.
Lean in.
Oh God, yeah, man. So let's be a little bit honest and raw here for a second. All right, as a kid, I was not tough, man. I was not the tough kid. You know how you said, Jason, you said you have that dad with like the badass kids that come around.
Yeah.
That wasn't me, man. I was not that kid. All right. I have an older brother who's like, 6'3", 250 pounds. He like looks like a linebacker. Like he was the tough one. And I was the one who wanted to be inside, like reading a book or something. That was me. And so I hated cold water literally from childhood. I I like hated cold water with a passion. We would go camping. My siblings would all jump into the creek, and I would like be standing there in my shorts on the side with my hands in my pockets.
Yeah.
And so the military like absolutely didn't give a shit what I wanted and just like made me do what they wanted, right? And so a big part of that was cold water. And it seemed like every part of my training that involved water was always in the winter. Man, I still think I have PTSD from those moments, man. It is just like, it would always be at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it would be just like trudging into like the coldest, shittiest water that you could imagine. And it just like became part of like what we did, because it's such an awesome way to torture people. It's such a good way to like, to bring about like that fight or flight response in someone so quickly, so instantly. Think about like, there's very like few things in the world that can actually like bring about that feeling in you like at a moment's notice. But like jumping into cold water is one of them, and it's something that's not going to kill you. So it's very good to use when you're trying to break people mentally, right? You want to see how people respond to stress. You want to see how they can like handle that fight or flight, that feeling of I want to quit. Everything in me wants to get out of this situation. Like cold water will do that. And that's why it's such a big thing in buds. It's such a big thing, guys going through SEAL selection or EOD selection. Like cold water is like the ultimate test for like mental stamina to like not quit at something. So how did I get into it later on? I don't know. It took a lot of years, man, to like be able to like intentionally come back to that when nobody's forcing me to do it. Honestly, I think it was my sister. She owns a gym, and she was like, "Hey, let's go do this cold plunge out in town." And I was like, "Absolutely not. No, that sounds stupid. I'm not going to go jump in cold water for like no reason. There's no benefit of it." But she like drugged me out. I did it. And it was like the feeling afterwards. It was like, oh my God, I feel absolutely incredible. And so, I'm one of those people who like goes all in on things. So I did it once. And then I was like, kind of like I did with going into the military. It's like, yeah, I met somebody who's in the military. I'm going to do that. And so it was like, I did cold plunging once. I'm going to do that. And so I just like built my own cold plunge, and, the rest was history. Now it's kind of like a daily practice.
Dude, man, kudos to you for making it daily. What I was telling you before we hit record, and then I said I'd save it for the podcast really quick, because last January, actually, I committed to doing it first thing out of bed. So literally like I was
such a bold commitment you made, bro.
There's literally a door in our bedroom. It's our back door. That's like right next to where I sleep in bed. So it was just open the door, go outside. And we live in Texas, so it doesn't get crazy cold, but it's like cold enough that like, not only do you take the covers off. That's like the first like, ooh, I'd rather be warm in the covers. Then you walk outside and you're like, man, I really want to go back inside. And then you go and open the cold plunge, and it's like staring at you, and because anyone that says that it gets easier the more you do it, I don't know. At least I personally have not experienced that. I think that if anything, what's coming, and like the dread is like the worst part. But I committed to that last January. I skipped a couple days, but I did most of them. But honestly, man, like to what you were saying about it giving you PTSD, I like haven't been able to find consistency with it since. Like I finished January and I was like, I committed, I tried my best, I did as much as I can. But actually, this conversation's inspired me to get back to it, because I have it. I made it. I've just been really bad about it. If anything, I get in now, but I'll get in just my legs because I'm doing a lot of running, which is like so
much easier.
Yeah,
it's the hands, bro. When the hands go in, it's the hands. But Gabe, let me ask you this though. Do you think that in hindsight, do you think you actually did more harm than good by making that commitment in January? Do you think if you looked at the span of a year and you said, how much exposure am I getting? Do you actually think you had less because of that?
I mean, maybe you can look at it that way, but I think that it was, I think that especially like after this conversation now, I think it was a very good experience of finding something that, I mean, talk about taking you out of your comfort zone. I think it did. And I think in the grand scheme of things, it'll be a net positive. If you're looking at it just like the year, I think that maybe you can make that argument, but I think that sometimes you should do some stuff that like even sets you back a couple steps because it was kind of that scary. I think that's kind of the point. But this conversation's inspiring me to get back in. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get back in.
What do you think it did for you? Like, what do you think it did for you mentally?
Ooh. Man, it was also during a time. So January last year was my wife was pregnant with our girl, because she came in May, and it was kind of in the middle of that. So it was a very interesting time for me, and that I was definitely experiencing what I would honestly, especially looking back now, is some of the like most anxious I've ever been. There was just a lot floating around with like this elation of being a new dad and having our first, and finally feeling like we were hitting our stride in a routine and being thrust back into the uncertainty of what now two kids was going to look like what that was going to be. And January to April for me was actually a very, very stressful time, to be honest. And I think that committing to that in January significantly helped. And then I picked up running soon after that as another thing that was just like an outlet for this like anxious energy. And I wasn't getting good sleep. I was waking up super early anyway. And I think those two things combined put me in a really good place once Charlie actually came here. So yeah, thinking about it, I think it was a big piece for me to kind of turn the corner on what was like a really anxious time for me.
I see. And what do you do now that's your hard shit?
Training for a marathon. Fitness has always been just kind of like an outlet to every day go out and like, really, really do something that gets you uncomfortable. But this is actually, a topic that me and Jason talk a lot about. I think that sometimes because we're such passionate fitness people, sometimes the fitness turns into something that isn't actually hard because we actually enjoy it. And because like you get to a point also in like long distance running where the long runs are actually really comfortable. They're actually like a really nice experience. I look forward to them. So it no longer serves that purpose. So, and if anything, answering the question, I don't think that I've found something now that is truly, truly hard. And I'm looking for that as we head into the new year.
Yeah. Seth, like one of the things we were talking about, like for me, it's like, I want to commit to reading more in 2024 for sure. At least one book, listening or written, a month at least, just to continue to expand out my mindset and my perspective. I think that I've had some life experiences that have opened up my perspective in a lot of things, but I think that everybody has their own echo chamber, and that's one of the reasons why we like the podcast. We get to talk to different people, but even those people are still within a certain parameter. So I think reading books outside that is going to help me just approach life, approach situations with a different perspective. So that's what I'm committed to. And that's one example, because I just don't do it. And it's not like hella hard, but it's just, I don't do it now. So I might as well add it in.
Yeah.
That's an example.
That's your hard now. And Gabe, I think that was perfect what you said when you said, we've been doing fitness for so long, but that fitness isn't really our hard thing anymore. Right. And I think that we too often get caught up in this, like, when you say do hard shit, I bet 90% of people's thoughts go to fitness, go to exercise, right? Because that's probably 90% of people's hard shit right there. But when you are like you guys, you're in the top, 1% of athletes in the world, almost certainly, like that's not your hard shit anymore. And there's plenty of other categories that probably are. And so like when I think about peak performance, or when I do coaching, or when I create content on this, I tend to think of it in a pyramid structure. So if you think of like the shitty food pyramid that they try to push on everyone, right? And it's got like these blocks going up. The bottom to me is, I label it as mind. Okay. And then the next block up is body. And then the next block up is connections or relationships. And then at the top of the pyramid is skills. And that's the way that I break everything down. And so within each of these blocks, we can break them down into subcategories. So if you look at the mind block, we can break it down into like cognition, emotion, behavior, and creativity, like the big areas of the brain. And once you look at those, you can break those down further into subtopics. And each of those has different ways that you can improve that aspect of your life. And so for the two of you, you've been very focused on the body aspect for many, many years, through your CrossFit and through your high rocks and through your different training evolutions that you've gone through. And in the body, we can break that down further too. We can say you have the mind-body connection, you have nutrition, you have movement, and you have rest. And within each of those, you have different topics and areas in which you can improve your life, right? And then we move into connections. And I say connections, some people might say relationships. I say connections because when we think of relationships, we think of like a romantic relationship or something like that. But like, what is your connection with people, places, and things? What's your connection with yourself, your spouse, your children, your family, your coworkers? If we go into places, what's your connection to your house or your work? Or, what's your connection with the kitchen? What's your connection with the gym? Things like that. And then into things, what's your connection with your phone and your TV and coffee and food and alcohol, right? And so when we tend to break it down into these subcategories, we can start to look and say, I'm really deficient in that area. Like, I'm really good at working out. I'm really good with the movement. I'm really good with nutrition. But man, I have a pretty poor relationship with my spouse, or I have a pretty poor relationship with myself. Or as Jason just alluded to, like, I have a poor relationship with, getting my mind outside of work and outside of this podcast and broadening, where I'm at. And so whatever those are, that's your hard shit. That's the thing that you need to address in that moment. And there's so many different ways you can address those things. But I think it's absolutely excellent what both of you just said. And those things are like, reading a book is not what people would consider their hard shit, but maybe that's what it is for you in this moment, because you have already leveled up in a lot of the other areas.
Seth, do you have what you just said, that pyramid with the categories? Do you have that available somewhere?
I will absolutely make it available to you. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out, and if there's a way we could link. I just think that that's what you just said, and the way you said it. I mean, I'm going to go back. I'll re-listen to this as well. But the way you just categorized it and broke it down, I hadn't thought about connections the way you explained it in terms like connection to your city, connection to your house. Like that was interesting to me. I'd love to just see the way you have it written out if possible.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so the way that I actually came up with this framework was, I had alluded to it a little bit earlier. When I got out of the military, I had a lot of symptoms that came up, and I didn't know what they were. And they were things like what I know now were anxiety and panic and PTSD, but I didn't know what they were at that time. I would go to bed feeling like I was drowning. I was tired all day. I was always losing my breath, things like that. So I ended up going to some different doctors, went to cardiology, neurology, had all these tests done, whatever. It took literally from 2010 until, I was in medical school in 2008 when I actually self-diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety. I was sitting through a psychiatry lecture, and I literally felt like the professor was talking about my life. And so I went to my doctor, said, hey, this is what I have going on. And they did what every good doctor does, and they threw me on medications. Sadly, that is the state of current healthcare. And I'm a doctor, and so I can say that. But that needs to be changed. But anyways, I was on medications for years until I kind of sat down one day and I said, like, you are giving in. You are being fucking weak. Like, that is what you're doing by just like saying, I'm going to be on a pill forever and doing nothing about it. Right? Like, every once in a while I would see something that said like, exercise more and you'll cure your anxiety. So I'd exercise more, and it didn't do shit. So, at least not for my anxiety. But basically I sat down one day and I said, look, you've done a lot of hard shit in your life. You've accomplished a lot of things. Like, there is absolutely no reason that if you dedicate the required amount of time to this, that you can't overcome this. And so what happened was, I started digging through a lot of research, a lot of literature, a lot of books, podcasts, topics, whatever. And I basically collated all of this and pulled it all into what is now this framework, this like peak performance framework that I have. And at that time, it wasn't a framework for peak performance. To me, it was a framework for me getting the hell away from anxiety and PTSD. And so I looked at it and I found my deficiencies. I found where I was really struggling, and I implemented tactics to intentionally improve each one of those areas of my life. And it was literally like 12 weeks. I was off all medications, never had a panic attack again, no anxiety. And so that is actually what built that framework that I just talked to you about.
Seth, within that framework, because one of the things we were actually talking about when you came on, and you mentioned as one, like, what's your relationship to alcohol? how do you differentiate between two things that I think can be very true for different people? One being the actual, like, hey, this isn't a big deal for me, so it's not an area I need to tackle. Like, hey, alcohol isn't a big deal for me. It's something that I enjoy once in a blue moon, socially, with family. It's part of like, culture, like not a big deal, so it doesn't need to be addressed. Versus what I know I've done many times in my life, which is there's an area that very much needs attention, and the ability for us to find ways forward, backward, and sideways to justify that it's not a big deal because it's the thing that you're most uncomfortable to actually like tackle head on as an area for opportunity for you to grow. And this is a tough question, but like, how do you differentiate between the two? Because I do think that like as humans with a very powerful ego, to not want to admit that we have these huge flaws or areas for opportunity, how do we differentiate between the two? Because I think both of those can be very real for people, but how can you actually identify which side of the coin you fall on?
That's a great question. I would say, I think people lie to themselves. I think they know. I do. I think, if you were to look at this list, I think you would know the areas that you're shit at, right? I think that people lie to themselves intentionally because they don't want to face the hard shit, right? It's the same stuff that we've been talking about this entire time. If we don't admit it, then we don't have to face it and we don't have to deal with it. I think that's all there is to it. I think people lie to themselves. And what I've learned through all of these years is that people who don't want help, you cannot help. You cannot help everyone. I cannot save everyone in the ER. There are so many people every single day that I treat who have COPD, asthma, are developing lung cancer, and they still smoke. They know what is the fucking problem. How many people I treat every day with liver failure who still drink? They know what is the problem, and they still do it. It's not even about knowing. It is about making the intentional choice for change. And we cannot save everyone. We cannot help everyone. No matter how hard you as a trainer want to fix some dad who's a slob and is wasting his life, you can't do it. He has to be the initiator. He has to make the choice to say, yeah, I admit it. Like, I suck at this area of my life and you have to help me. Like, I need someone to help me. But until that happens, you can't help him. You can't. And there's nothing you can do to convince people otherwise. Like, you know how many like anti-smoking conversations I've had as a doctor and how many have been successful? Maybe 1% if you're lucky. Maybe. Because people already know. They already know. The information's there. People know what they suck at, and they just choose to suck.
Is that same thing true, you think, as a doctor with like obesity and the health issues that come from it? I mean, smoking is pretty cut and dry. I think liver failure is pretty clear cut. But how about the obesity and like diabetes and things like that? Do people still are they still like they know, they just choose not to change?
Yes, 100%. Look at all the information out there. Now, what I will say about the dieting and nutrition is we just have like this freaking epidemic of fad diet bullshit. Like, and I know that you guys are like very into that space, and it's just like, man, it is like just built for profit, and all it does is confuse people about what is right. But I think if you ask, 90% of people like what is a healthy diet, they could tell you like within a range, like what a pretty healthy diet is. People who are fat know that why they're fat. It's interesting. I've literally had some people come in that are like 400 or 500 pounds and tell me that all they eat is vegetables. And I've literally had conversations with people and like, all right, let's get real for a second, because in order for you to be as fat as you are, you've had to eat a dump truck full of vegetables every single day. Like, you can't get that many calories in a day from vegetables. And so these people know. They just lie to themselves over and over and over again. But yes, with obesity, diabetes, all those things, people know the answer. They know the solution. It's out there. It's I mean, you can't even scroll through YouTube, further than 10 feet of clips without running into something on how to lose 10 pounds in 20 days or whatever it is. Like it's known.
Yeah. Yeah. Gabe and I, we talk about that a lot, about these fad diets have done actually, I think, more harm than good in many ways. Cause to your point, like if you ask most people, most of the time, they have a general idea of what would be good foods. It's just, I think we've gotten really complicated. Gabe is actually working on a nutrition protocol for Train Hard. And it's really just rooted in some like rudimentary, like simple stuff. Eat 3 meals, prioritize protein, and have a 90-10 rule where like 90% of the time you're on, 10% give yourself a little, something. So because consistency, I love what he came up with that. So shout out to you, Gabe. But
yeah, have you heard of what's her name, Casey Means?
Oh,
I don't know
of
if
course.
you've come across her. Oh, absolutely excellent. That's somebody that you should have on your podcast, man. She's just killing it. And I mean, she's working at really high levels now. She's influenced the Trump campaign and everything. And that's why they hired Kennedy for the health czar position or whatever you want to call it. But like, I think that is kind of the awakening that we're having in the medical community. You have a lot of doctors now who are kind of saying, no, like, this is bullshit. Like we are peddling for, big pharma here is what we're doing. And we're not actually addressing the underlying issues. Like, how many Band-Aids are we going to put on before we like fix the wound underneath? But
yeah, I mean, the Casey and Callie Means podcast, the original one with Tucker Carlson, man, like that should be like a must listen for people. And I know some people will like disregard because it's Tucker, but that podcast, the job that they did, and also her story and how she kind of like her arc and how she came to where she is now, just gives it so much validity. But yeah, no, I love Casey and Callie Means.
I gotta go check that out for sure. Seth, I want to, at a later date, Liz, who, helps produce the show, I'd love for her to connect with you to, schedule another episode. In particular, I'd love to dive into in that episode, which we didn't get time on this particular episode, is the medical system, if you're open to it. I'd love to hear from you, what you're seeing, how the evolution is, because, I've spent some time in the medical system, not nearly as much time as you, and I've seen one side of it. And I'm curious on your perspective, where you're seeing this trends going. And so we'd love to have you on to talk specifically about that, plus a bunch of other stuff. I just think your story, man, is so remarkable. I really appreciate the time you took with us today on this show to shine insight. And I'm looking forward to seeing the document that you have on those areas. And frankly, like selfishly looking at it for myself and being like, dude, where can I start kind of pinpointing? So yeah, well, dude, Seth, I want to be sensitive of your time. For everybody listening to this podcast, man, go back, listen to this one again. Seth just dropped so much incredible knowledge. And if you got value from it, which I know you did, because I did, make sure to share this episode with a friend and leave the podcast a rating and review. It allows the podcast to get into more hands, to impact more people, and to level us all up. So Seth, I appreciate you. Gabe, as per usual, you the man, and we'll see you guys all again soon.
Hey, thanks, guys.